The investigation portion of a lesson is a critical place for students to learn the work of becoming an independent learner. It's not just that they have an opportunity to ask their own questions, but that they have an opportunity to be in an environment by which they're not dependent on the teacher. The teacher has structured something for them to explore. Hopefully it is more of an open-ended exploration than a closed-ended one, where there's a true question at hand to be figured out or a true opinion to come to, where there's not a right answer that students are trying to guess what the teacher is thinking.
Investigation in all this teaching and learning is what I consider important for any student to do, but particularly for transfer students who've been deprived of the privilege of getting a lot of information and then being able to work with that information. It's absolutely necessary. It's mandatory to have, because otherwise you don't develop. If they don't investigate something, all they're going to do is spit knowledge back, and we know that that means they don't really remember it, and they don't even actually remember it, because if you don't investigate something, there's a level to which it makes no sense. It's not embedded in any kind of work. For our students, it's particularly important. It's something they don't do. Give me a worksheet, let me fill it out, and if I can't do it, so be it, and if I can do it, great, but just give me the worksheet.
When they came to me, they were like, well, Tegan, just tell me the steps and I'll do it. I was like, well, I'm not going to tell you the steps. You're gonna figure out the steps and why those steps make sense. And they were really resistant to it at first, but once they got the idea that I actually wasn't gonna tell them all the steps, they started to apply the strategies to it, and they've retained a lot more.
So essentially, Tegan is focusing on having the students be independent workers, independent thinkers, and independent learners by giving them sort of these tasks that they have to manage on their own and that they have to rely on each other for.
I'm going to give you the equation, and you're going to come up with the graph. That's the part you don't like? I bet you're going to like it by the end of the day, because it's not going to be that bad. You guys know all of the steps you need to do in order to graph the line, but you got to kind of put all of the parts in your head together to come up with how to graph it. So what I'm going to give each of you, each group, you're going to get 4 envelopes. Your first envelope has your equation in it, the one you're going to graph. Okay? The next 4 envelopes have the numbers 1 through 4 on them, and they're hints. So if you're trying to graph your equation and you get stuck, you open up the hints in order. So first you open up hint number 1. And inside is a question. And you're going to answer that question, and the answer that you get will help you figure out how to graph the equation. The very first part of the lesson was activating the prior knowledge and what we had done yesterday, which was taking a slope and a point on the graph and graphing the line. And then from there, we went into an activity where they were actually given an equation and asked to graph the equation. And after they did that, we shared it out and came up with a class guidelines for how you graph a linear equation in general. And then I asked them to practice that and show me what they had learned by graphing 3 more equations on their own. And then we sort of did a little synthesis activity where they matched equations and graphs.
Basically, we looked at the equation and we had like this game we played inside the classroom. So we had to use the equation, and if we didn't get some of the answers or we didn't know certain things, we had to open the envelopes.
The questions that were in the hint envelopes, I got those because I said, what are the gaps going to be for them? And what would I say to them if they asked me? And I would never actually give them a direct answer of what they need, like the exact information they need to know. I would always ask them a question that would then prompt them to give me that information.
So if that's the slope is -2.
Aha. How did you know to put it over 1?
Because rock is over 1. That's how it's supposed to be.
That's true. Like slope is supposed to be a fraction, y is over 1, but how
But
did you know that 1 was?
Put it under 1. That's going to make it the absolute value.
She's able to give different equations to different groups. So students are grouped according to different skill levels and according to who's going to work well with each other. And then she can give sort of groups who are really ready for it some of the more difficult equations, and then groups who might struggle a little bit more some of the simpler equations.
I mean, follow the.
Find the slope.
Nah, we already got the slope.
Follow the slope?
Yeah, follow the slope. I think helping and being be inside of a group is very good, because you can help other kids that didn't understand, or maybe kids that do understand, they can help you. Y'all can put two heads is always better than one.
I actually do this coaching work in several different cities and with several different groups. And one of the common things that teachers talk about is group work is really hard with overage and undercredited kids, right? That they're too old, they've already learned all of these bad habits, and they don't want to work in groups, they just want to get their diploma and get out. And I think that the more we work on it and the more we develop specific ways to work within these schools and develop what works within these schools, the more we're sort of proving that mindset wrong.
My class with Tegan is very unique in a way, because in the class is like she makes sure you get that understanding, even when like you second guess yourself, like she makes sure that you give that feeling that you never want to second guess yourself, like you sure.
Sometimes the students get ahead of themselves and they just want to get the answer and they don't want to stop and think about it. So that's one of the biggest challenges for me, is saying, okay, wait a second, think about what you just said to me. Does what you said make sense?
You can change one sign, change a fraction to a decimal, and it might as well be Greek then, because they have no conceptual understandings. And the only way you can understand a concept is to investigate it.
I think naturally Tegan, as a new teacher, was, while she always knew that it's what she would want to do, she wanted to facilitate independent thinkers and learners, she often fell into the trap of feeling like they're not going to get it if I don't tell them it. And what we've seen from last year to this year is she's been able to move from the I'm going to tell you the information to I'm going to support you in finding out the information.
This theory of gradual release, I do, you watch, we do together, then you do, and I watch. The question is, how do you move from we do together to independence? One of the things I see teachers doing is saying they hold the hand too long, they continue to ask all the questions, so the kid hasn't learned to think critically, doesn't have the literacy skills, doesn't have metacognition. If we haven't explicitly modeled, they understood, had a chance to practice with the material, they may not be ready. So let's think more scientifically about how we gradually release.
There are a couple things I look for when I'm trying to see whether or not students are becoming more independent learners. One of the biggest indicators is how much talking I actually have to do. Because with one group in the class today, I barely had to say anything. They were talking to each other the whole time, and they were talking about the work.
During an investigation, you know things are going well if the majority, if not all, of the students are actively engaged in the task at hand. They can be engaged in all kinds of things. It helps if they're actually engaged in the task at hand. If they're able to talk to each other, and they're able to work for periods of time without getting too stuck. And when they're stuck, they don't panic because they know that there's a procedure, right? I can try this, then I can try this, and I know that my product has to look like this, and I know where my directions are, and I know if I get really stuck, then I can ask the teacher.
Especially in math, they're often afraid to ask questions, first of all. And if they do ask questions, they're asking something like, what is that? Or what did you just do? Or they don't really ask the higher order questions, like why and how questions. So I actually taught a whole unit on Bloom's taxonomy, and I had them practicing with writing and asking and identifying higher order questions. And I started getting a lot more advanced questions, which gave them a much better understanding of everything that we've done since then.
A teacher could lecture, give you notes, kids will read it. They may even come in with an exciting discussion, but that teacher didn't facilitate that. That was because the kids had a certain level of skill sets. Our children are just as bright, but they don't have those skill sets. So Investigation is about developing not only the what, but the how.
Without a really rich investigation period, which involves multiple resources, hopefully multimedia resources, truly higher order thinking types of experiences, students never get a chance to actually develop those muscles and to actually figure out what does it mean to think about things in a deep way? What does it mean to actually look at a complicated set of material and think about it? And what do I do when I get stuck, short of raising my hand and saying, teacher, I don't understand. What do I do?
The content isn't even as important as the skills and the strategies, because if a student can break down a problem into its parts, determine what's important, pull out the important things, and use their background knowledge to say, what do I know about these things? They can figure out how to solve most problems without actually having been taught that.
Teachers here at Olympus understand that teaching skills and teaching thinking are often of primary benefit, and sort of the content will follow, you know, if the students have the skills to understand the content and have the skills to interact with text.
I think the greatest successes is when I have small conferences with students and they talk about being able to learn on a way that they never did before at their previous schools. The teachers have become very explicit about teaching, you know, I'm teaching you how to make connections, I'm teaching you how to determine importance, and the students being able to put their finger on the skill that they've learned and can now apply is a huge success from this model.
My main goal is not necessarily to get them to understand how to graph a linear equation. They need to know that for the regents. They need to know that for certain professions. They may need to use it later in life, but my main goal is to get them to think about the problem in a certain way. So to take information that's given to them and make something out of it, and to pull together ideas that they knew from before to make something new. And if they can think like that about math, they can think like that about anything in real life.